She signed the wrong lease and ended up in a contract marriage with her millionaire landlord. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. It all started on a rainy afternoon when Emma Carter rushed into the leasing office of a downtown building. Her umbrella had flipped inside out from the wind, her sneakers were soaked, and her hair clung to her face. She was desperate to find a cheap place before the end of the month. With 2 jobs, student loans piling up, and no family nearby, this lease meant survival. The receptionist handed her a thick folder. Sign here. Initial here. And here. Congratulations, you are all set. Emma barely glanced at the paperwork, her pen scribbling quickly as raindrops from her sleeve smudged the ink. She muttered, I could sign away my soul at this point. I just need a roof. What she did not realize was that her folder had been mixed up with another set of documents prepared for a completely different kind of agreement. Bold letters across the top page read, Marriage Contract. But Emma's tired eyes skipped right past it. Hours later, she lugged her duffel bag into the lobby of the building, surprised at how luxurious it looked. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and a concierge who looked at her thrift store jacket like it had personally offended him. She felt out of place, but told herself it was worth it if the rent was as cheap as she was promised. That night, Emma unpacked her things in a small unit on the 12th floor. The rain tapped against the window as she arranged her few belongings. A second-hand coffee maker, 3 mismatched mugs, and a cactus named Bob that she insisted was her emotional support plant. She even spoke to it. Well, Bob, we are finally not homeless. Small victories. The next morning, a knock thundered at her door. Emma opened it to find 2 men in suits. They did not look like movers or maintenance staff. One of them spoke crisply. Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Alexander Hayes requests your presence immediately. Emma blinked. Who? They escorted her down to a penthouse office at the top of the building. Behind a massive oak desk sat Alexander Hayes himself, the millionaire property magnate who owned the building and half of the city's skyline. He was reviewing a file when he looked up, his blue eyes sharp enough to cut glass. Mrs. Hayes, he said evenly, I assume you know why you are here. Emma laughed nervously. I think you have the wrong person. I just signed a lease yesterday. He slid the folder across the desk. Her own signature stared back at her, sprawled under the heading, Marriage Agreement. Emma's jaw dropped. Wait. What? This is not my lease. This is a marriage contract. Alexander leaned back, studying her as if she were a puzzle. You signed it. My lawyers have confirmed the validity. According to this, you are legally my wife, as of yesterday at 4:17 p.m. Her pulse raced. She stood up so quickly that Bob the cactus, which she had carried with her for comfort, toppled over in its pot. One of the suited men actually caught it mid-air and set it back down, looking utterly confused. Emma pointed at the document, her voice shaking between outrage and disbelief. No sane person would call this binding. It was a mistake. Alexander's lips curved into a smirk. Mistakes can be binding when they come with signatures and witnesses. No? The room went silent, except for the tick of his antique clock. Emma could hardly breathe. A simple search for an affordable apartment had turned into something unthinkable. She wanted to scream. She wanted to laugh. She wanted to wake up from whatever bizarre dream this was. But Alexander Hayes was not joking. And Emma Carter had just stumbled into the most outrageous mistake of her life, a mistake that was about to change everything. Emma's hands trembled as she stared at the folder. The bold words at the top page refused to disappear, no matter how many times she blinked. Marriage Agreement. Her signature sat below it in smudged ink, as permanent as a tattoo. She shoved the papers back toward Alexander. This has to be a mistake. I was signing a lease, an apartment lease. Nobody in their right mind would think this is real. Alexander did not flinch. His voice was calm, even cold. Mistake or not, the contract bears your name, your signature, and 2 legal witnesses from my staff. In the eyes of the law, this is binding. Emma's chest tightened. You cannot be serious. I do not even know you. I just needed a place to live. He leaned forward, elbows resting on the desk. The faintest shadow of amusement flickered in his eyes. You signed a document in my building, under my terms. If you are careless with paperwork, perhaps you should read before you scribble. Or are you in the habit of signing things blindly? Her face flushed red. She had always been the type to skim through things quickly, convinced she could figure it out later. But this was not a cell phone contract or a receipt for cheap shoes. This was something far bigger, something insane. Emma's voice cracked. I cannot be your wife. This is ridiculous. Alexander tapped his pen against the desk, the sound sharp as a gavel. I am not asking for love or devotion. I need a wife on paper for 6 months. After that, you can walk away. Your rent will be erased, and you will leave with a generous settlement. Emma's heart thudded in her chest. Why 6 months? His jaw tightened. Because in 6 months, my family expects me to announce stability. My board of directors demands it. Investors prefer a man who is not alone. A temporary wife solves several problems. The absurdity of it made Emma laugh nervously. So let me get this straight. I was just trying to find an affordable apartment. And now you want me to play house with you because your family cannot mind their own business? Alexander did not answer immediately. He simply slid another document across the desk, this one thinner, typed neatly, every clause highlighted. Terms of agreement. No intimacy, no obligations beyond appearances. You attend events with me, wear the ring, smile when the cameras are on. In return, your rent vanishes, and you receive a stipend. Think of it as employment. Emma's eyes darted across the page. It was all laid out in bullet points, clinical and cold. Her role was not wife in the emotional sense. It was wife as performance, as image. Her stomach twisted. It was insane. No one would believe this. Yet, the envelope of cash she had tried to hand him earlier had felt laughably small compared to the looming debt. She sank back in her chair, whispering, "This cannot be real." Alexander's voice cut through her haze. "You have a choice. 7 days until eviction, or 6 months under contract. Which sounds more appealing to you?" Her pulse raced. She imagined dragging her duffel bag and her cactus bob down the street again, moving from couch to couch, begging friends for space. She imagined sleeping in her car when her friends got tired of her presence. The picture was bleak, humiliating. Yet, the alternative was sitting across from her in a $1,000 suit, watching her unravel. Emma swallowed hard. What happens if I refuse? Alexander's smile did not reach his eyes. Then you leave, and I pursue damages for breaching what is already a signed contract. Believe me, my lawyers would enjoy the exercise. Tears pricked at her eyes. He had cornered her with her own mistake. Her only defense was that nobody could possibly expect a young woman to understand every page of a 100-document packet on a rainy day. And yet, the reality was on the desk in front of her. She whispered, more to herself than to him. I just wanted a lease, not a life sentence. For the first time, Alexander's expression softened, though only slightly. It is not a life sentence. It is 6 months. Consider it a detour. Sometimes the wrong turn leads somewhere unexpected. Emma looked at him, stunned by the strange, almost poetic remark from a man who seemed built out of stone. She wanted to scream at him, laugh at him, maybe even throw the cactus at his perfect face. But deep down, a small voice whispered what she hated most to admit. She was out of options. The room felt smaller with every second she hesitated. Alexander leaned back, waiting, confident she would fold. And maybe she would. Because for Emma Carter, the girl who only wanted a roof over her head, this outrageous mistake had already trapped her in a reality she never saw coming. Emma dragged her duffel bag into the penthouse suite 2 days later, her stomach twisting with dread. She had delayed as long as she could, clinging to the hope that Alexander would change his mind or that a miracle would fall from the sky. Neither happened. The contract stood. Now she was here, stepping into a space that looked less like an apartment and more like a magazine spread. Marble floors gleamed, gold fixtures sparkled, and the windows stretched from floor to ceiling, framing the skyline like a painting. "Welcome home, Mrs. Hayes," the butler said stiffly as he took her bag. The title made Emma flinch. She muttered under her breath, "I should get hazard pay for this." Bob the cactus was tucked safely under her arm, and she placed it on the wide marble counter in the kitchen. The butler's eyebrow twitched as though the little plant had insulted the expensive countertop. Emma patted Bob and whispered, "Do not listen to him. You belong here more than I do." Oh. Later that evening, Alexander appeared, dressed in a charcoal gray suit, even though it was already 9 o'clock at night. He walked through the penthouse with the precision of a man inspecting his own empire. His eyes landed on the cactus. "What is that?" he asked flatly. Emma folded her arms. "That is Bob. He stays." Alexander raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. He simply walked into his office and closed the door, as if her emotional support plant was too trivial to acknowledge. The next morning began their strange new routine. A maid knocked at her door with a breakfast tray stacked with croissants, fresh fruit, and a glass of orange juice poured into crystal. Emma looked at it, then reached for the instant coffee she had brought from her old apartment. She stirred it into a chipped mug, ignoring the shocked gasp from the maid. When Alexander saw her at the table, sipping instant coffee beside a feast that could have come from a 5-star hotel, he said, "Do you enjoy being deliberately contrary?" Emma took another sip. "It tastes like survival. Your imported beans taste like pretentiousness." For a moment he almost smiled, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Their days were filled with awkward collisions. Emma tried to do laundry, only to accidentally shrink one of Alexander's expensive sweaters. When he held it up, glaring, she shrugged. "Now it is a sweater for Bob." She burned toast in the stainless steel toaster and nearly set off the smoke alarm. She sang loudly in the shower, her off-key notes echoing through the marble bathroom. Each incident chipped away at the icy atmosphere, though Alexander would never admit it. At night, she lay awake in the massive bedroom, staring at the invisible line she had drawn down the center of the bed with pillows. She called it the Great Wall of Boundaries. When Alexander returned late from meetings, he would glance at the barricade, shake his head slightly, and settle on his side without a word. But it was not all arguments and mishaps. There were small, unexpected moments that unsettled Emma even more. Once, she sneezed violently while carrying a tray of tea, and Alexander caught it before it spilled all over the carpet. Another time, she caught him working late at his desk, his tie loosened, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. She quietly placed a cup of her cheap coffee next to him. He did not thank her, but the next morning, the mug was washed and placed neatly on the drying rack. Despite the cold contract and their endless differences, something was shifting, creeping in through the cracks neither of them wanted to admit were there. Emma tried to ignore it, burying herself in sarcasm and stubbornness. But each night, when she glanced at the skyline glittering beyond the penthouse windows, she felt it. This mistake was becoming more complicated than she ever intended. And Alexander Hayes, the millionaire who had trapped her with a single careless signature, was no longer just a landlord. He was becoming something else, something she did not yet dare to name. Emma had been living in the penthouse for nearly 3 weeks when the first real test of their strange arrangement arrived. Alexander walked into the living room one evening, holding a sleek black invitation. He placed it on the coffee table in front of her. "Formal gala. Friday night. You will attend as my wife," he said simply. Emma glanced at the card, then back at him. "Do I get a say in this?" Alexander's gaze was steady. "Not if you intend to keep the agreement." Emma groaned, leaning back into the couch. "Great. Nothing says fun like pretending to be married to a millionaire at a ballroom full of people who probably have forks worth more than my entire wardrobe." On Friday, she found herself in front of a floor-length mirror as a stylist zipped her into a gown Alexander had chosen. It was silk, deep sapphire blue, hugging her figure in ways that made her blush. Bob the cactus sat on the bathroom counter as though supervising. Emma looked at her reflection and muttered, "Bob, we are officially out of our depth." When she stepped into the living room, Alexander was waiting in a tuxedo, polished and sharp. His eyes flickered over her just once, but the look made her pulse stutter. He offered his arm without a word, and she reluctantly took it. The gala was everything Emma had feared: crystal chandeliers, endless champagne, and guests dripping in diamonds. The whispers started the moment they entered. She could feel eyes on her, scanning her dress, her hair, her every move. Some women sneered openly, while men looked her over with curiosity. At their table, a woman leaned forward with a saccharine smile. "So, Emma, where did you and Alexander meet?" Emma froze, her mind blank. She had not prepared for this. Before she could stumble through a lie, Alexander's hand slid over hers on the table, firm and steady. "She walked into my life in the most unexpected way," he said smoothly. Eyes locked on hers, as though daring her to contradict him. The table chuckled politely, moving on, but Emma's heart thudded. The warmth of his hand lingered even after he pulled away. Later, when she slipped out onto the balcony for air, she overheard a group of women whispering, "She is clearly after his money. Look at her. She probably signed some ridiculous contract just to stay here." Emma's chest tightened, humiliation burning her cheeks. She turned to leave but nearly collided with Alexander, who had appeared behind her. His expression was unreadable as he asked, "Did you hear them?" She forced a bitter laugh. Hard not to, when they talk loud enough for the chandeliers to hear. For a moment, she thought he would brush it off, tell her to ignore them. Instead, he surprised her. "Do not let them get to you. They have no idea who you are." Emma blinked, startled. His tone was not mocking or cold. It was firm, almost protective. Before she could reply, a clumsy waiter stumbled nearby, nearly tipping a tray of champagne onto her. Without thinking, Alexander caught the tray with one hand and pulled her against him with the other. The crowd gasped, cameras flashed, and suddenly they were the center of attention. Emma's heart pounded as she looked up at him, her hands pressed against his chest. For a second too long, neither of them moved. When he finally let her go, his voice was low. "See? You do belong here." On the ride back to the penthouse, Emma stared out the window, trying to steady her thoughts. The city lights blurred past, but the image of Alexander's hand around hers, his arm pulling her close, replayed again and again. Back in her room, she placed Bob on the nightstand and whispered, "This is getting dangerous." Because for the first time, Emma realized she was not only surviving this mistake, she was beginning to feel something she had sworn she never would for the man who had trapped her with a signature. Emma thought the gala would be the peak of awkwardness, but she was wrong. Within a week, the tabloids were filled with photos of her and Alexander. One headline read, "Who is this nobody married to the city's coldest millionaire?" Another said, "Gold digger or Cinderella?" Every time she passed a newsstand, she wanted to throw Bob the cactus through the glass. One morning, she walked into the kitchen to find Alexander sitting at the counter, scrolling on his tablet. His jaw was tense, and his expression unreadable. Without looking up, he said, "You are on every gossip site in the city." Emma poured herself a cup of coffee, ignoring the fancy espresso machine in favor of her chipped mug. "Great, at least now I am famous for something other than burning toast." Alexander finally looked at her, his eyes sharp. "They are tearing you apart. Do you not care what people think?" Emma's laugh was bitter. "If I cared what people thought, I would not be here in the first place. Besides, you are the one who dragged me into this." His silence was heavier than words. That night, Alexander insisted she attend a charity dinner with him. The ballroom was even more suffocating than before. As they entered, cameras flashed, voices called out, and Emma felt every pair of eyes pierce her like needles. At the dinner table, a silver-haired investor leaned toward Alexander, his smile slick. "Alexander, I never thought you would settle down with someone like her." The words sliced through Emma. She forced herself to sip water, pretending not to care, but her hand trembled. When she glanced at Alexander, she expected him to defend her, to say something, anything. But he only adjusted his cufflinks and let the comment slide. Emma's chest burned with humiliation. Later, in the restroom, she overheard two women whispering. "She probably signed a contract. Look at her. She does not belong in this world." Emma locked herself in a stall, gripping her dress to keep from crying. She told herself she did not care, but the sting was too sharp to ignore. When she returned to the table, Alexander was deep in conversation with other executives, barely glancing at her. She sat stiffly, her fork untouched, her smile forced. On the ride home, the silence in the car was suffocating. Emma finally snapped. "You heard them, all of them, and you said nothing," Alexander's gaze stayed fixed on the road. "I told you from the beginning, this is just a contract, nothing more." His words hit harder than any insult from strangers. Emma turned toward the window, her throat tight. "Right, just a contract." When they arrived at the penthouse, she marched straight to her room. She pulled out her duffel bag from under the bed and began tossing clothes inside. Bob the cactus was the last thing she packed, cradled carefully in her arms. Her voice trembled as she whispered to herself, "I should have never signed anything, not even by mistake." For the first time since she moved into the penthouse, Emma felt the walls closing in. This was not survival anymore. It was suffocation. She stood in the doorway with her bag slung over her shoulder, staring at the skyline one last time. The city lights glittered like they were mocking her. She had thought she could handle this insane arrangement. But she was wrong. Emma Carter was ready to walk away, even if it meant returning to the chaos she had tried so hard to escape. Emma did not leave that night. She could not. Standing in the doorway with her duffel bag and Bob clutched to her chest, she realized she had nowhere else to go. Pride told her to walk out, but reality forced her to stay. So she unpacked in silence, her anger burning like a hidden ember. The next morning, she avoided Alexander entirely. She skipped breakfast, stayed in her room most of the day, and ignored the buzzing of her phone when tabloids plastered her face on their homepages again. But by evening, she could not avoid him any longer. The entire penthouse seemed to vibrate with tension. She found him in his office, pacing. His usually composed face was tight with frustration. Papers were spread across his desk, and his phone lit up with unanswered calls. He glanced up when she entered, his expression unreadable. "You are still here," he said, his tone flat. Emma hugged Bob closer, resisting the urge to snap. "For now, but do not flatter yourself. I am not staying because of you." Alexander ignored the jab. He gestured at the pile of documents. "The board is meeting tomorrow. Investors are nervous. The press is calling this marriage a circus. And if they pull their funding, everything I have built collapses." Emma frowned. "So what? You drag me into this mess? Then sit there acting like I am the problem? Maybe if you actually defended me, people would not treat me like a sideshow." His jaw clenched, but he did not respond immediately. Instead, he turned toward the window, the skyline glowing behind him. "I do not waste words on people who do not matter." Her voice shook with fury. "Maybe I do not matter to you, but I matter to myself. And I am sick of being treated like a mistake you are too proud to admit." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then, to her shock, his voice dropped, softer than she had ever heard it. "It was not a mistake." Emma blinked. "What?" Alexander turned, his expression raw, stripped of its usual armor. "You think I would risk everything on a whim? You think I did not notice when you walked into that office that day? You are chaos, Emma, but you make people believe. And right now, I need someone the board cannot ignore." Emma felt her pulse spike. It was the closest thing to honesty he had ever given her. Yet the vulnerability only made her angrier. "So I am just a pawn in your corporate game. Great. That makes me feel so much better." Before he could respond, his phone rang again. He answered sharply, pacing as he spoke to one of his executives. Emma watched him, torn between wanting to scream and wanting to understand. That night, she lay awake in her room, staring at the ceiling. She thought about the gala, about the cruel whispers, about how he had pulled her close in front of everyone without hesitation. She thought about the words he had just spoken. It was not a mistake. Something inside her shifted, but she shoved the feeling away. The next morning, Alexander left early for the board meeting. Emma wandered the penthouse restless. Bob perched on the counter like a silent companion. By noon, the tension was unbearable. She imagined him facing a room full of men in suits, all ready to tear him apart. She surprised herself by whispering to the cactus, "Maybe he does not deserve it, but I cannot just watch him burn." Oh, for the first time, Emma Carter, who had signed a lease by mistake and ended up in the strangest marriage anyone could imagine, realized she had a choice to make. She could keep running from the chaos, or she could step into the fire with Alexander Hayes. The boardroom was a battlefield dressed in polished wood and glass. Emma had never set foot inside before, but when she pushed the heavy doors open, the room fell into a stunned silence. Executives in tailored suits stared at her, as though she were an intruder. At the head of the long table, Alexander stood rigid, his expression a mask of stone. "Mrs. Hayes," one of the older men sneered, "this is not the place for you." Emma's palms were damp, but she lifted her chin. "Funny, that is what people said when I signed the wrong papers too. And yet, here we are." The board murmured, unsettled. Alexander's eyes flickered with surprise, but he said nothing, watching her with unreadable intensity. Emma stepped closer, her voice clear. "I know what you all think of me. A mistake, a distraction. Someone who does not belong in your world. But mistakes do not ruin empires. Cowardice does. And right now, you are ready to tear down the man who built this company because of your fear." One man leaned forward. "Do you even understand what is at stake here?" Emma drew a breath, steadying herself. "Yes, I do. I studied finance before life forced me to quit school. Numbers do not scare me. People do. People who believe gossip over results. People who think a woman like me cannot possibly add value. Well, I am here to tell you that I can, and I will not stand by while you destroy him." The room crackled with tension. Alexander's hand clenched into a fist at his side, but his face remained calm. Emma's gaze swept across the table. "You want to know if I am a liability? Then look at me. I signed the wrong contract, and it turned into the smartest decision of my life. Because now, I am not just his wife on paper. I am standing here, fighting for him, when all of you would rather run." A hush fell. The board members shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. For the first time, Alexander's composure cracked. His eyes softened, pride flickering where there had only been control. Emma did not wait for permission. She walked to his side, her hand brushing his on the table. "This marriage may have started as a mistake, but I am not leaving. Not today. Not when he needs me." The silence was broken by the chairman clearing his throat. "Perhaps we should reconsider our assumptions." And just like that, the tide began to turn. Emma had walked into the boardroom as an outsider. But in that moment, she became something far more dangerous to Alexander's enemies. She became his ally. The meeting did not end in cheers or applause. It ended in a stunned silence that carried more weight than any vote could. The board members shifted in their seats, their sharp expressions dulled by the quiet conviction in Emma's voice. No one dared challenge her again, not after she had stood there, unshaken, beside Alexander. When the chairman finally spoke, his tone had softened. "We will postpone the vote. For now." It was not a victory, but it was no longer the death sentence Alexander had feared. As the executives filed out, murmuring among themselves, Emma stayed rooted in place. Her knees trembled, but she forced herself to stand tall. When the doors closed and they were alone, Alexander turned to her. "You should not have been here," he said quietly, though his voice lacked its usual sharp edge. Emma folded her arms. "You are welcome. I just saved your empire." For a second, silence stretched between them. Then, to her shock, Alexander laughed. Not the bitter, mocking sound she had come to know, but a genuine laugh that caught her completely off guard. "You are unbelievable," he said, shaking his head. "Walking in here like you own the place." Emma arched an eyebrow. "Someone had to remind them that you are not alone." His gaze softened, and for once, there was no mask, no calculation. Just Alexander, stripped bare of the armor he wore every day. He stepped closer, his voice low. "You were never just a mistake, Emma. Not to me." The words left her breathless. That night, back at the penthouse, the city lights spilled into the living room as they sat in silence. Emma cradled Bob, the cactus, in her lap, stroking its pot absent-mindedly. Alexander leaned against the window, watching her. Finally, he crossed the room and placed a small box on the table. Inside was a ring, not the stand-in prop she had worn for the cameras, but something new, something real. Emma looked up, her eyes wide. "What is this?" Alexander met her gaze. "No more contracts, no more mistakes, just us." The air between them felt heavy, alive. Emma's heart pounded as she realized what was happening. The contract that had begun as a disaster was gone. What remained was a choice, hers, his, theirs. For the first time since the day she signed the wrong papers, Emma felt like she was not trapped anymore. She was free. And somehow, against all odds, freedom meant staying right where she was. Emma sat at the kitchen counter the next morning, Bob the cactus proudly perched beside her chipped mug of coffee. For the first time since she had stumbled into this twisted arrangement, the penthouse did not feel like a cage. It felt lived in. Alexander entered, jacket slung over one arm, his usual sternness softened by something unspoken. He poured himself a cup of the expensive coffee he always drank, then eyed her mug. Still refusing the good stuff? Emma smirked. Survival tastes better. He shook his head, but this time, instead of criticism, there was a flicker of amusement. He sat across from her, resting his hand on the table near hers, close enough that their fingers almost touched. "Do you regret it?" he asked suddenly. "Signing the wrong papers." Emma glanced at Bob, then back at him. She let the silence stretch, her thoughts traveling back through every moment, the humiliation, the arguments, the laughter, the way he had stood beside her in the boardroom, the way his words had stripped away her doubts. Finally, she said softly, "It was the worst mistake I ever made, and the best one." Alexander's lips curved into something that almost resembled a smile. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the ring he had shown her the night before, and slid it across the table. "Then let us call it what it really is, not a mistake. A beginning." Her throat tightened as she picked up the ring, turning it over in her hand. This was no longer about contracts or convenience. It was a choice hers, and she chose him. Emma slipped the ring onto her finger. The fit was perfect, as though it had been waiting for her all along. The days that followed were quieter but brighter. The tabloids lost interest when they realized the scandal was not tearing Alexander apart. The whispers faded, and the city moved on to its next obsession. But Emma and Alexander remained, building something real out of the ashes of their supposed mistake. One evening, as they sat on the balcony watching the city glow beneath them, Emma leaned her head against his shoulder. Bob the cactus sat nearby in a new pot, upgraded from the old chipped one, a silent witness to everything they had endured. Emma whispered, "So, still think I do not belong here?" Alexander's arm tightened around her. "You belong here more than anyone," and with that, the story of a woman who signed the wrong lease and a man who thought he had everything found its true ending, not with contracts or signatures, but with something stronger. Love, born out of the strangest mistake of all.